The low, threatening growl of 45 military dogs echoed through the darkness of Afghanistan's Bagram Air Base, freezing every soldier in their tracks. Master Sergeant Mason Brooks, the most decorated dog handler in Special Forces, stood paralyzed as he witnessed something impossible. The entire pack of combat dogs forming a protective circle around a small woman in blood-soaked fatigues kneeling in the dust. "They're just animals," Mason snarled, his voice dripping with contempt as he stared at Private First Class Rachel Walker, who remained motionless at the center of the canine formation. "And you're just a veterinary technician playing dog trainer." Rachel said nothing, only placed her trembling hand on the nearest German shepherd's head, blood from the gash on her arm dripping onto the animal's fur. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move, just leaned into her touch with absolute devotion that defied everything Mason knew about military working dogs. Behind Mason, General Samuel Carter, a 4-star general with 30 years of combat experience, surveyed the scene with eyes cold as Arctic ice. "The mission has failed," he declared, his voice cutting through the desert night like a blade. 12 of our soldiers have fallen. Leave the bodies. That's an order." But not a single dog moved. They stood like living statues, creating a perfect defensive perimeter around Rachel and the fallen soldiers. In that terrible moment of silence, a truth no one could have imagined was about to surface, and it would shatter everything the military thought they knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the true strength of those deemed unworthy. The story had begun 72 hours earlier, when Rachel Walker first arrived at Bagram Air Base carrying a worn veterinary bag that looked more suited for a suburban animal clinic than a military installation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as transport planes roared overhead, and the acrid smell of jet fuel mixed with desert dust filled the air. She walked with measured steps, neither too fast nor too slow, her 5'4" frame dwarfed by the towering special operators who brushed past her without a second glance. The K-9 training facility sat at the eastern edge of the base, a sprawling complex of kennels, training grounds, and administrative buildings, surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. As Rachel approached the main gate, she could hear the controlled chaos of morning training, dogs barking, handlers shouting commands, the sharp crack of training weapons firing blanks. She paused for a moment, adjusting the strap of her bag, and that's when she saw them for the first time. 45 military working dogs, a mix of German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Dutch Shepherds, were arranged in perfect formation on the training field. Their handlers stood beside them, backs straight, eyes forward, as Master Sergeant Mason Brooks paced in front of the assembly like a general inspecting his troops. Mason was everything Rachel wasn't. 6'3", 220 pounds of muscle, with arms thick as tree trunks and a voice that could make grown men flinch. His uniform bore the patches and badges of someone who'd seen combat on 4 continents, and his eyes held the hard edge of a man who'd sent dogs into situations where not all of them came back. "Excellence," Mason barked, his voice carrying across the field, "is not negotiable. These dogs are weapons. They are tools. They are extensions of American military power, and they will be treated as such. Any handler who thinks otherwise, who treats these animals like pets, who shows weakness or emotional attachment, will be removed from this program immediately." Rachel watched from behind the fence as one young handler, barely out of basic training, reached down to scratch his dog's ear. Mason was on him in 3 strides, his face inches from the soldiers. "Did I give you permission to pet that weapon, Private?" "No, Master Sergeant. That dog is not your friend. It is not your companion. It is a piece of military equipment worth more than your annual salary. You will treat it with respect, not affection. Is that clear?" "Yes, Master Sergeant." Rachel's hand tightened on her bag strap as she watched the interaction. The dog, a beautiful black German Shepherd, had its ears pinned back, tail tucked, clearly stressed by the tension radiating from its handler. She could see the subtle signs of anxiety in several other dogs as well. Excessive panting despite the cool morning air, rigid postures, dilated pupils. These animals were wound tight as springs, ready to snap at any moment. "You must be the new veterinary technician," a voice said behind her. Rachel turned to find Colonel Grace Anderson, a woman in her early 40s with silver threading through her regulation bun and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Grace commanded the base's medical operations, which technically included veterinary services, though the K-9 unit operated with significant autonomy under Mason's iron-fisted control. "Yes, ma'am." Private First Class Rachel Walker reporting for duty. Grace studied her for a moment, taking in Rachel's slight build, her carefully neutral expression, the way she held herself with a curious mixture of military bearing and something else, something harder to define. You've worked with military dogs before? I've worked with dogs, ma'am. The military part is new. It wasn't entirely a lie. Rachel had indeed worked with dogs, though the context of that work was buried in classified files that even Grace Anderson's security clearance couldn't access. Well, you're about to get a crash course. Mason Brooks runs the tightest K9 unit in the entire theater. His dogs have the highest success rate for IED detection, the best combat performance metrics, and the lowest casualty rate. He's also, Grace paused, choosing her words carefully, extremely particular about how things are done. He doesn't believe in what he calls emotional contamination of the animals. Rachel nodded, keeping her expression neutral, even as her mind cataloged the stress behaviors she'd observed in the dogs. High performance metrics meant nothing if the animals were one bad day away from a breakdown, but she knew better than to voice that opinion on her first day. I understand, ma'am. Grace led her through the gate and across the compound toward a small building that served as the veterinary clinic. Inside, the space was functional but sparse. Examination tables, basic surgical equipment, supplies for treating everything from minor cuts to gunshot wounds. Rachel set her bag down and immediately began familiarizing herself with the layout, her movements efficient and practiced. Your primary duty is medical care for the dogs, Grace explained. Routine health checks, injury treatment, vaccination schedules. Mason handles all training and operational matters. Your support staff, nothing more. Is that clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. But even as Rachel nodded her understanding, she noticed something through the window. One of the dogs from the formation, a Belgian Malinois with distinctive scarring on its left flank, had broken from its position and was staring directly at her. Not at the building, not at the general area, but at her specifically. The animal's entire body was oriented toward her location, ears forward, tail still, with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for tracking a target. That's unusual, Grace murmured, following Rachel's gaze. That's Rex. He's one of Mason's most disciplined dogs. I've never seen him break position without a command. Rachel said nothing, but she could feel the weight of the dog's attention like a physical thing. Rex knew something. Animals always did. They could sense things humans missed, smell chemicals that revealed hidden truths, detect changes in body language too subtle for conscious observation. And Rex had detected something about Rachel Walker that his handler hadn't noticed yet. The moment was broken by the sharp sound of Mason's whistle. Rex immediately snapped back to attention, but not before Mason had noticed the lapse. His eyes tracked from the dog to the veterinary building, and Rachel saw his jaw tighten when he spotted her in the window. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that brief moment, she saw what would define their relationship: dismissal, contempt, and the absolute certainty that she didn't belong here. If you're watching from a military family or have ever witnessed the incredible bond between handlers and their canine partners, let us know your location in the comments below. These stories of loyalty deserve to be heard. Subscribe now to honor their service. Rachel's first official interaction with Mason came 2 hours later when she was scheduled to perform routine health checks on half the unit. She'd set up in the examination area, supplies laid out with military precision, when Mason arrived with the first group of dogs. He didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't offer a greeting, just stood against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her every move with the intensity of someone expecting failure. The first dog was a German shepherd named Titan, a massive male with intelligent amber eyes and a coat that gleamed like polished obsidian. As Rachel approached, she noticed the subtle tension in the animal's shoulders, the way his weight shifted slightly backward, classic signs of a dog that had been trained to suppress its natural responses. "Hey there, big guy," she said softly, extending her hand for him to sniff. "We don't talk to them," Mason interrupted sharply. "These aren't pets. They respond to commands, not conversation." Rachel glanced at him but didn't argue. Instead, she began her examination in silence, though her hands moved with a gentleness that seemed to confuse Titan. The dog kept trying to turn his head to look at her, his tail attempting small wags that had clearly been trained out of him. When she checked his ears, she noticed scarring consistent with repeated corrections from a prong collar, and when she palpated his ribs, she found old fractures that had healed without proper treatment. "This dog has multiple old injuries," she said, keeping her tone professionally neutral. Broken ribs that weren't properly set, damage to the ear canal, signs of chronic stress in the jaw muscles from excessive bite work without adequate recovery time. That dog has completed 47 successful missions, Mason countered. He's detected more IEDs than any other dog in this unit. Those injuries are badges of honor from serving his country. These injuries are affecting his performance. The ear damage alone has probably reduced his hearing by 30%. The rib fractures are causing compensation patterns that will lead to hip dysplasia within a year if not addressed. Mason pushed off from the wall, his considerable bulk filling the small examination room. Are you questioning my training methods, Private? The emphasis on her rank was deliberate, a reminder of the vast gulf between them in the military hierarchy. Rachel met his gaze steadily, though she had to tilt her head back to do so. I'm providing medical assessment, Master Sergeant. That's my job. Your job is to keep these dogs functional, nothing more. He turned to leave, calling Titan to heel with a sharp command. The dog immediately obeyed, though Rachel noticed the slight favoring of his right side as he moved, confirming her assessment about the compensation patterns. As they left, she made detailed notes in Titan's medical file, documenting every injury, every sign of chronic stress, every indicator that these dogs were being pushed beyond their limits. The pattern continued with each dog Mason brought in. Zeus, a Belgian Malinois with PTSD symptoms so severe he flinched at sudden movements. Apollo, a Dutch shepherd whose anxiety manifested in obsessive licking that had created open sores on his legs. Athena, the only female in the group, who showed signs of severe depression, her eyes dull and lifeless despite her perfect obedience. Rachel documented everything, saying little, but her gentle handling of each animal seemed to create a strange reaction. Dogs that hadn't wagged their tails in months suddenly showed signs of relaxation. Animals trained to maintain rigid military bearing began to lean into her touch. And most remarkably, they all oriented toward her when she moved around the room, their attention locked onto her with an intensity that grew more noticeable with each passing minute. It was during the examination of the 15th dog, a scarred German shepherd named Odin, that things escalated. Odin had a reputation as the most aggressive dog in the unit, having bitten 3 handlers and requiring a muzzle for all interactions. Mason brought him in with 2 assistants, the dog restrained by multiple leashes and wearing a basket muzzle that prevented him from opening his mouth more than an inch. This one's dangerous, Mason warned, though there was something almost pleased in his tone, as if he expected Odin to prove his point about Rachel's inadequacy. He was captured from insurgents who used him for fighting. We've reconditioned him for military service, but he's never fully adjusted. No one examines him without full restraint. Rachel studied Odin, taking in the massive scarring across his body, the way one ear had been partially torn off, the defensive posture that spoke of years of abuse and violence. But she also noticed something else, the way his eyes tracked her movements not with aggression, but with a desperate kind of hope. "Remove the muzzle," she said quietly. Mason laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You want to lose your face on your first day? Remove the muzzle, Master Sergeant. I can't properly examine his teeth and gums with it on. That's a direct safety violation. I won't authorize it." Rachel turned to face him fully. "Then I'll document in his medical record that a complete examination couldn't be performed due to handler restrictions. That documentation will go to veterinary command, who will want to know why standard medical procedures weren't followed." The threat was subtle but clear. Mason's perfect record, his reputation for excellence, would be tarnished by official documentation of interfering with medical treatment. His face darkened, but after a long moment he nodded to his assistants. "Your funeral, Private. When he tears your throat out, don't expect me to save you." The assistants removed Odin's muzzle with practiced efficiency, immediately stepping back and raising their catch poles in defensive positions. Odin stood rigid, his lips pulled back to reveal impressive fangs, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Rachel didn't move for 30 seconds, simply standing still and breathing slowly. Then, without any sudden movements, she sat down on the floor, making herself smaller, less threatening. She didn't look directly at Odin, instead focusing on a point just past his shoulder, avoiding the direct eye contact that aggressive dogs often interpreted as a challenge. "I know," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what they did to you. I know what you've been through. But I'm not them." Mason scoffed. "It doesn't understand English, Private." But Odin's growling had stopped. The massive dog stood frozen, his scarred head tilted slightly, studying this strange small human who sat on the floor, instead of towering over him. Rachel slowly extended her hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, offering but not demanding. "You don't have to trust me," she continued in that same soft voice, "but I need to help you. That old wound on your shoulder is infected. I can smell it from here. It probably hurts every time you move. Let me help." What happened next would become legend among the handlers who witnessed it. Odin, the dog who had sent 3 men to the hospital, who required constant restraint, who trusted no one, took 3 slow steps forward and gently placed his scarred head in Rachel's outstretched hand. The room went completely silent. Mason's assistants lowered their catch poles in shock. Even Mason himself stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. Rachel slowly raised her other hand and began examining Odin's wounds with gentle efficiency. The dog not only allowed it, but began to lean into her touch, his eyes closing in what looked remarkably like relief. "That's impossible," Mason breathed. "That dog is a trained killer. He can't." Rachel found the infected wound she'd detected, a deep puncture that had been hidden beneath scar tissue and matted fur. She cleaned it carefully while Odin stood perfectly still, occasionally turning his head to watch what she was doing, but showing no signs of aggression. "Dogs aren't weapons," she said as she worked. "They're not tools or equipment. They're living beings with memories, trauma, and the capacity for both trust and healing. When you treat them like machines, you break something fundamental in them. Spare me the philosophy lesson, Private. These dogs save lives. They could save more if they weren't broken." She finished treating Odin's wound and stood slowly. The dog immediately positioned himself at her left side, sitting without being commanded, his shoulder touching her leg in a gesture of connection that military dogs were specifically trained not to make. "Odin, heel," Mason commanded sharply. The dog's ears twitched, acknowledging the command, but he didn't move. He stayed pressed against Rachel's leg, his eyes fixed on Mason with something that looked remarkably like defiance. "Odin, heel, now!" Still no movement. For the first time in his military career, one of Mason's dogs was refusing a direct order. The master sergeant's face flushed red, veins standing out on his neck as he stepped forward. "What did you do to my dog?" "I didn't do anything. I just treated him like a living being instead of a weapon." Rachel gently touched Odin's head. "Go on, boy. Go to him." Immediately, Odin rose and trotted over to Mason, sitting perfectly at his heel as trained, but his head turned back toward Rachel, and his tail, which hadn't wagged in 2 years according to his file, gave 3 small wags before stopping. Mason stared at her, with a mixture of suspicion and something else, something that might have been fear. "You're done for today. Get out of my facility." Rachel gathered her supplies without argument, but as she left, she heard the strangest sound, a soft whine from not just Odin, but several other dogs in the facility, as if they were calling after her. Through the window, she saw something that would have been impossible to believe if there hadn't been witnesses. All 15 dogs that had been examined that day had turned toward the door she'd exited through, their attention focused with laser-like intensity on her retreating form. That evening, the mess hall buzzed with whispered conversations about the new veterinary technician who'd somehow tamed Odin. Soldiers who had never paid attention to support staff suddenly knew Rachel's name, though the stories grew more elaborate with each telling. By the time dinner was served, rumors claimed she'd made Odin roll over and play dead, that she'd commanded the entire pack with just a whisper, that she possessed some kind of supernatural ability to control animals. Rachel sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her meal while pretending not to hear the conversations around her. She'd changed out of her work clothes into a clean uniform, but there was still blood on her boots from treating Odin's wound, a detail that several people noticed and added to the growing mythology. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up to find Specialist Ashley Chen, a young intelligence analyst with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. Ashley worked in the Tactical Operations Center and had no direct connection to the K-9 unit, which probably made her one of the few people on base willing to risk Mason's displeasure by associating with Rachel. "Free country," Rachel replied, gesturing to the empty chair. Ashley sat down, placing her tray carefully on the table. "So, you're the one who made Master Sergeant Brooks look like he'd seen a ghost." "I examined some dogs, that's all." "That's not what I heard. I heard Odin followed you around like a puppy. That dog once bit a sergeant's hand so badly, he needed reconstructive surgery." Rachel continued eating without responding, but Ashley wasn't deterred. "Where did you train? Your veterinary skills, I mean." "State University, nothing special." It was another carefully constructed half-truth. Rachel had indeed attended a state university, though what she'd learned there was far from ordinary. But those details were buried in files that didn't officially exist, covered by a story that would hold up under casual scrutiny but fell apart if anyone dug too deep. "You don't act like someone fresh out of school," Ashley observed. "The way you handled Odin, the way all the dogs responded to you, that's not normal." Rachel finally looked up, meeting Ashley's curious gaze. Maybe the dogs just recognized someone who actually cares about their well-being. Before Ashley could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Mason strode in with 3 of his senior handlers, including Sergeant Connor Mills, a stocky man with cruel eyes and a reputation for using excessive force during training. Connor spotted Rachel immediately and made a beeline for her table, his expression promising trouble. "Well, well, the dog whisperer," Connor's voice dripped sarcasm. "Heard you put on quite a show today. Made the boss look stupid in front of his men." Rachel didn't look up from her meal. "I did my job." "Your job?" Connor laughed, the sound drawing attention from nearby tables. "Your job is to give shots and clean up shit, not to interfere with training operations. Medical care includes behavioral assessment." Connor slammed his hand on the table, making Ashley jump. Rachel didn't flinch, though her stillness had a quality to it that suggested coiled readiness rather than fear. "Listen carefully, Private Princess. Those dogs are trained killers. They're not pets for you to coddle. You may have gotten lucky with Odin today, but luck runs out. And when it does, when one of those dogs tears into you because you were too stupid to maintain proper protocol, don't expect any of us to save you." Rachel finally looked up, and something in her eyes made Connor take an involuntary step back. It was just a flash, lasting less than a second, but Ashley saw it. The look of someone who had seen real violence, who had survived things that would break most people, who was choosing to remain calm, not out of fear, but out of discipline. "Is that a threat, Sergeant?" "It's a prediction." Connor turned and stalked away, rejoining Mason and the others at their table, but the damage was done. Everyone in the mess hall had witnessed the confrontation, had seen Rachel marked as an outsider, a target. In the rigid hierarchy of military life, she'd just been branded as someone who didn't belong. Ashley leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to be careful. Mason Brooks doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. He's ended careers for less than what happened today. I'm not here to make friends. No. But you're also not here to make enemies. And trust me, Mason Brooks is not an enemy you want." Rachel resumed eating, but her peripheral awareness tracked every movement in the room. She noticed how the dog's handlers clustered together, their body language aggressive and exclusionary. She observed Mason speaking quietly but intensely to someone on his phone, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her. She cataloged the exits, the potential weapons, the tactical advantages and disadvantages of her position, old habits, muscle memory from a life that was supposed to be behind her. But as she'd learned long ago, you could leave the battlefield, but it never truly left you. Later that night, Rachel stood outside the canine facility, technically off-duty, but drawn by sounds of distress she could hear from a quarter-mile away. The handlers couldn't hear it. Human ears weren't sensitive enough to pick up the high-frequency whines and stress vocalizations the dogs were making. But Rachel heard every sound, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The facility was supposed to be locked down for the night, but security was focused on keeping threats out, not preventing someone with the right knowledge from getting in. Rachel found a maintenance access point that had been carelessly secured. The lock engaged but not properly checked. It took her less than 30 seconds to gain entry. Inside, the kennels were dimly lit by emergency lighting. The dogs were all awake, pacing in their enclosures, exhibiting severe stress behaviors. Zeus was spinning in tight circles, a repetitive behavior that suggested psychological breakdown. Apollo had rubbed his nose raw against the kennel door. Athena sat in the corner of her enclosure, facing the wall, completely unresponsive to Rachel's presence. But it was Odin who broke her heart. The scarred warrior who'd shown such trust in her earlier was now cowering in his kennel, pressed into the furthest corner, trembling. Fresh wounds on his legs suggested he'd been subjected to additional training after she'd left. "Oh boy," she whispered, approaching his kennel slowly. "What did they do to you?" Odin's eyes tracked to her, and despite his fear, his tail gave a single, tentative wag. Rachel reached through the bars, letting him sniff her hand, and he pressed his nose against her palm with desperate need for comfort. "I know," she said softly. "I know it hurts, but I'm going to fix this. All of it. She moved from kennel to kennel, offering what comfort she could through the bars. Each dog responded to her presence, oriented toward her, their stress behaviors diminishing slightly just from her being there. It was then that she noticed something odd. All 45 dogs were moving in subtle synchronization, their breathing gradually matching hers, their movements reflecting her energy. It was pack behavior, but not normal pack behavior. They were syncing to her as if she were their alpha, their leader, their protector. A sound from outside made her freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching the facility. Rachel quickly moved to the back of the building, finding another exit just as the main doors opened and lights flooded the space. "I told you I heard something," Connor's voice echoed through the facility. "Someone's been here. Check the cameras," Mason ordered. "I want to know who's been in my facility after hours." But Rachel was already gone, moving through the shadows with practiced ease, her dark clothing blending into the night. She made it back to her quarters without being seen, but as she lay in her bunk, she knew this was just the beginning. The dogs needed her, and she'd made them a promise. She was going to fix this, even if it meant revealing truths that were supposed to stay buried. The next morning brought unwanted scrutiny. Rachel arrived at the veterinary clinic to find Mason waiting for her. Flanked by Connor and another handler she recognized as Corporal Blake Harrison, a young soldier with something to prove and a mean streak a mile wide. "Someone broke into the K-9 facility last night," Mason said without preamble. "Know anything about that?" Rachel set down her medical bag and began preparing for the day's examinations. "No, Master Sergeant. Funny thing is, the dogs were all calm when we checked this morning. Usually, if a stranger breaks in, they'd be going crazy, but they were quieter than I've ever seen them. Maybe whoever it was wasn't a stranger to them." Mason stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that dogs have good memories. Could have been someone they knew from before." "Before what?" Rachel looked up at him with innocent eyes. "Before yesterday. You have a lot of handlers rotating through. Maybe one of them came back to check on the dogs." It was a reasonable explanation, one that Mason couldn't directly refute, but the suspicion in his eyes deepened. "From now on, you're not allowed near the facility after hours. In fact, you're not allowed near the dogs at all unless I'm personally present. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Master Sergeant." But even as Mason laid down his restrictions, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see handlers struggling with several dogs who were refusing to enter the training area. Rex, the Belgian Malinois who'd noticed Rachel on her first day, had planted himself firmly and wouldn't budge despite his handler's increasingly forceful commands. Two other dogs had followed suit, their passive resistance spreading through the pack like a contagion. "What the hell is wrong with them?" Mason muttered, storming outside. Rachel followed at a distance, watching as the situation escalated. The more force the handlers applied, the more the dogs resisted. It wasn't aggressive resistance. None of them were showing teeth or growling. They simply wouldn't move, their bodies locked in place as if waiting for something, or someone. Rex's head turned toward Rachel, and the moment their eyes met, he stood up and calmly walked to the training area. The other dogs immediately followed, leaving their handlers stunned, and Mason's face purple with rage. "This is your doing," he hissed at Rachel. "I don't know how, but you've done something to my dogs." "I've done nothing but treat them with kindness, Master Sergeant. If that's enough to disrupt your program, maybe the problem isn't with me." The challenge in her words was unmistakable, and several enlisted personnel who'd gathered to watch the commotion exchanged shocked glances. A private first class didn't speak to a Master Sergeant that way, not unless they had a death wish for their career. Connor stepped forward, his hand moving to his sidearm in an unconscious gesture of aggression. "You need to learn your place, Private. My place is providing medical care to these animals. Nothing more, nothing less. Your place is wherever Master Sergeant Brooks says it is," Blake Harrison added, eager to curry favor with his superiors. "And right now, that should be on your knees, apologizing for your disrespect." The sexual undertone in his comment was unmistakable, and several female soldiers in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. But Rachel simply stared at him with those unsettling, calm eyes. "I kneel for no one, Corporal." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, delivered with a quiet authority that seemed incongruous coming from someone of her rank. For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. It was General Samuel Carter who broke the tension, his voice cutting across the training ground as he approached with his aide and several senior officers. The four-star general's presence immediately changed the dynamic, everyone snapping to attention except Rachel, who rendered a perfect salute that spoke of muscle memory, deeper than her supposed inexperience should have allowed. "At ease," the general said, his eyes taking in the scene, the agitated handlers, the strangely calm dogs, and Rachel standing alone against Mason's group. "Master Sergeant Brooks, report." "Sir, we're experiencing some behavioral irregularities with the dogs. I believe it may be related to disruptions in their routine." "Disruptions?" The general's aide, a sharp-eyed major named Williams, consulted his tablet. "According to the logs, the only change has been the arrival of a new veterinary technician. That hardly seems disruptive. Private Walker has been implementing unorthodox methods," Mason said carefully. "The dogs are showing unusual responses to her presence." General Carter studied Rachel with interest. She stood at attention, but showed no signs of intimidation, despite being scrutinized by one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire theater. "Private Walker, is it? Tell me, Private, what's your assessment of our K-9 unit?" Rachel hesitated for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to show respect for the question, but not so long as to appear evasive. "Sir, the dogs are highly trained and disciplined. However, I've observed signs of chronic stress and some untreated injuries that could affect long-term performance." "She's been here 2 days," Connor interjected. "She doesn't have enough experience to make those assessments." The general held up a hand, silencing Connor. "Continue, Private." "Sir, stress in military working dogs can manifest in subtle ways. Decreased scent detection accuracy, delayed response times, increased handler aggression. These dogs are performing now, but they're operating at maybe 70% capacity. With proper care and adjusted training methods, they could be at 95% or higher." "That's ridiculous," Mason said. "My dogs have the highest success rate in the entire region." "Your dogs have a 38% IED detection rate," Rachel said quietly. "The average for military working dogs in optimal condition is 52%. Your casualty rate is the lowest, not because the dogs are performing well, but because handlers are taking fewer risks, running fewer missions. The statistics are being manipulated to hide diminishing returns." The silence that followed was deafening. She'd just accused Mason of falsifying performance reports, a career-ending allegation if proven true. "How could you possibly know our detection statistics?" Major Williams asked, his fingers flying over his tablet as he pulled up classified reports. Rachel realized her mistake immediately, but covered smoothly. "I reviewed the medical files, sir. Injury patterns tell a story. The types of wounds, their frequency, the mission reports attached to medical treatments. It paints a picture. It was plausible enough, though anyone who dug deeper would find that the medical files didn't contain nearly enough information for such specific conclusions. But the general seemed more interested in the implications than the source. "Master Sergeant Brooks, is there any truth to these allegations?" Mason's jaw worked silently before he answered. "Sir, statistics can be interpreted many ways. My priority has always been keeping American soldiers alive. It wasn't a denial, and everyone noticed." "I want a full review of the K-9 program," General Carter ordered. "Major Williams, coordinate with Veterinary Command. I want independent assessment within 72 hours. He turned back to Rachel. "Private Walker, you'll provide your full analysis to Major Williams." "Yes, sir." As the general departed, Mason's eyes promised retribution. Rachel had just made a powerful enemy, but she'd also planted seeds of doubt about his methods. The dogs seemed to sense the shift in power dynamics, several of them orienting toward her despite their handlers' attempts to maintain control. That afternoon, while documenting her observations for Major Williams, Rachel was interrupted by Chief Warrant Officer Ethan Hayes, a man she'd noticed watching her from a distance since her arrival. Ethan was in his mid-40s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many deployments and too many friends lost. He entered the clinic and closed the door behind him, checking to ensure they were alone. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Rachel continued typing, though her peripheral attention was entirely focused on him. "About what, Chief?" "About who you really are." Her fingers paused for just a fraction of a second before resuming. "I'm Private First Class Rachel Walker, veterinary technician." Ethan pulled something from his pocket and set it on the desk. It was a challenge coin, but not just any coin. It bore the insignia of SEAL Team 6's K-9 division, with a set of numbers that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who knew. "I was at FOB Chapman 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Operation Red Sand. I was part of the QRF that responded when everything went sideways. I saw what you did that night." Rachel's entire body had gone still. the kind of stillness that preceded violence or flight. But Ethan held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not here to blow your cover. Hell, I couldn't even if I wanted to. That operation is so classified that officially it never happened. But I know who you are, Phantom, and I know why you're here." The name hit her like a physical blow. Phantom. She hadn't heard that call sign in 2 years, not since the night she'd supposedly died in Syria. "You're mistaken," she said, but there was no conviction in it. 45 dogs, Ethan continued. "The exact number that were left behind when the unit was ambushed. The exact number you refused to leave, even when the command ordered you to evacuate. You stayed for 18 hours, just you and the dogs, holding off enemy forces until extraction could arrive. 11 soldiers died that night, but 34 lived because those dogs gave early warning, because you wouldn't leave them." Rachel's hands had formed fists on the desk, knuckles white with tension. "After that, you vanished. Official story was KIA, but some of us knew better. You don't just lose someone like Phantom, you hide them. You give them a new identity, a new mission." Ethan leaned forward. "Is that why you're here? These 45 dogs? They're not random, are they?" "I don't know what you're talking about." But even as she denied it, Rex appeared at the window of the clinic, followed by 2 other dogs who'd somehow escaped their handlers. They sat in perfect formation, watching her through the glass with absolute focus. "They remember you," Ethan said softly. "Maybe not consciously, but on some level, they know. That's why they're responding to you. That's why Mason's control is breaking. These are the same dogs from Syria, aren't they?" Rachel finally looked at him directly, and for a moment, Ethan saw past the careful mask to the warrior beneath, scarred, tired, but unbroken. "Those dogs were abandoned once," she said quietly. "It won't happen again." "Mason's planning something," Ethan warned. "He's been making calls to his contacts at JSOC. He knows something's off about you, even if he doesn't know what. Be careful." "I'm always careful." Ethan stood to leave but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, we should have never left them behind in the first place. What you did that night, it was the kind of heroism they don't put in the official reports, the kind that actually matters." After he left, Rachel sat alone in the clinic, staring at the challenge coin he'd left on her desk. 3 years of hiding, of pretending to be less than she was, of watching from the shadows as the military she'd served made the same mistakes over and over. She had thought she could do this quietly, could fix things without revealing herself. But the dogs remembered. They knew who she was, even if they couldn't articulate it. And soon, everyone else would know too. That evening, as she walked past the K9 facility on her way to quarters, she heard it again. The synchronized breathing of 45 dogs, their awareness focused on her like a spotlight. Through the fence, she could see them all oriented toward her, despite being in separate kennels, their eyes glowing in the reflected security lights. "Soon," she whispered, knowing they couldn't hear her, but saying it anyway. "I promise. Soon." Inside the facility, Mason stood watching the same scene from a different angle, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, sir," he said to whoever was on the other end. "I need everything you have on Rachel Walker. Everything. Because I don't think that's really her name." The pieces were moving on the chessboard, alliances forming and breaking in the shadows of Bagram Air Base. In 72 hours, a mission would launch that would shatter every assumption, reveal every secret, and test the bonds between human and animal in ways no one could imagine. But for now, in the darkness of an Afghan night, 45 dogs waited patiently for their true alpha to return, while a woman with too many secrets prepared for a war she'd thought she'd left behind. The mission briefing came at 0400 hours on the 3rd day, delivered in the sterile confines of the Tactical Operations Center where maps of the Hindu Kush Mountains covered every wall. General Carter stood at the front, his expression grave as he addressed the assembled special operations teams. Rachel wasn't supposed to be there. Veterinary technicians didn't attend classified briefings, but she'd positioned herself near the ventilation grate in the adjacent supply room where sound carried through with perfect clarity. "Operation Iron Shield launches in 18 hours, the general announced. Intelligence indicates a high-value target meeting occurring in the Korangal Valley. We're sending in a joint task force, 12 operators from SEAL Team 7, supported by our K9 unit for IED detection and perimeter security." Through the grate, Rachel could see Mason standing with the other team leaders, his chest puffed with pride at his unit's inclusion in such a critical mission. Connor Mills and Blake Harrison flanked him, already discussing which dogs to deploy. Weather forecast shows a storm system moving in, Major Williams added, pulling up satellite imagery. Limited air support after insertion. This needs to be quick and clean. Get in, neutralize the target, get out. Rachel's blood ran cold as she studied the terrain visible on the displays. She knew that valley, had studied every ridge and ravine during her time as Phantom. It was a natural kill box, surrounded by high ground on 3 sides with only one viable extraction route. If anything went wrong, if the enemy had advance warning, it would become a death trap. "Sir," one of the SEAL team leaders spoke up, "what's our contingency if we're compromised?" "Standard protocol, fight your way to the extraction point. Air support will be on standby, weather permitting." Weather permitting. Rachel wanted to scream at the casual dismissal of what could become a critical factor. She'd seen too many operations fail because planners assumed best-case scenarios. Through the grate, she noticed Chief Warrant Officer Ethan Hayes shifting uncomfortably, clearly sharing her concerns, but unable to voice them without revealing classified knowledge. "The K-9 unit will provide early warning and IED detection," Mason announced confidently. "My dogs are ready for anything." But Rachel had examined those dogs. They were exhausted, stressed, operating on pure conditioning rather than genuine capability. Zeus still flinched at sudden movements. Apollo's anxiety was barely controlled, and Odin, despite his trust in her, remained traumatized from years of abuse disguised as training. They weren't ready for a high-risk operation, especially not in terrain that favored ambush. After the briefing concluded, Rachel waited until the TOC emptied before emerging from her hiding spot. She needed to do something, but her options were limited. Going to Mason would be useless. He'd dismiss her concerns and probably report her for accessing classified information. General Carter might listen, but she'd need to reveal how she knew so much about the terrain and tactical implications. She was still wrestling with the decision when Ashley Chen found her in the veterinary clinic an hour later. "You look like someone who just got very bad news," Ashley observed, setting a cup of coffee on Rachel's desk. "Just thinking about the dogs. They're being prepped for a mission." Ashley's expression turned serious. She worked in intelligence and knew what that meant, even if she couldn't discuss specifics. "Big one? Big enough." They sat in silence for a moment before Ashley spoke again. "I did some digging on you. Don't worry, nothing official, just curious. Your record is too clean, too perfect. It's like you didn't exist before 2 years ago." Rachel kept her expression neutral, but internally, she was calculating exit strategies. If Ashley had found inconsistencies, others might too. "Everyone has a past," Ashley continued. "Some just bury it deeper than others. But sometimes, when things get bad enough, that past has to come back, even if it costs everything." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Whatever you're really here for, whatever you're planning, just remember that some secrets are worth revealing if it saves lives." After Ashley left, Rachel sat alone, staring at the challenge coin Ethan had left on her desk. The weight of command, of responsibility, of knowledge that could save lives but would destroy her cover, it all pressed down on her like a physical burden. Through the window, she could see the K-9 unit preparing for deployment. Handlers were loading dogs into transport vehicles, checking gear, running through final preparations. The dogs knew something was wrong. She could see it in their body language, the way they kept looking toward the veterinary clinic, toward her. Rex actually tried to break away from his handler, pulling toward her location before being forcibly corrected. The message in their behavior was clear. They didn't want to go, not without her. That afternoon, Mason made his final mistake. He arrived at the clinic with Odin, the scarred warrior who'd shown such remarkable trust in Rachel. But this time, the dog was wearing a shock collar, the kind banned by most military units for its potential to cause psychological damage. "He needs a sedative," Mason announced. "Light dose, just enough to keep him manageable during transport." Rachel looked at Odin, saw the way he was trembling, the fresh burn marks on his neck from the collar. What happened? Disciplinary issue. He's been resistant to commands. The collar is a training tool, nothing more. That collar is torture. It's explicitly prohibited by military veterinary guidelines. Those guidelines are suggestions, not orders. This is my dog, my unit, my mission. You'll provide the sedative, or I'll find someone who will. Rachel stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "No." "Excuse me?" "I said no. I will not sedate a traumatized animal so you can continue abusing him. That collar comes off, or I report this to the Inspector General." Mason stepped closer, his size advantage even more pronounced in the small clinic. You're going to threaten me? A private nothing threatening a master sergeant? I'm a medical professional refusing to enable animal abuse. Mason's hand shot out, grabbing Rachel's wrist with crushing force. It was his second mistake. The first had been underestimating her. This one would be harder to recover from. Rachel didn't think, didn't plan, simply reacted with muscle memory, honed through years of close-quarters combat training. She twisted her wrist in a direction Mason didn't expect, breaking his grip while simultaneously stepping inside his guard. Her other hand found pressure points that civilian veterinary technicians shouldn't know existed, sending shooting pain up his arm. Mason stumbled backward, more from shock than pain, staring at her with a mixture of rage and confusion. "What the hell?" "Don't ever touch me again," Rachel said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that Mason had only heard in combat zones, from people who had killed and would kill again if necessary. For a moment, they stood frozen, Mason rubbing his wrist while processing what had just happened. A veterinary technician who weighed maybe 120 pounds had just neutralized a special forces operator twice her size. "Who are you?" he asked. But before Rachel could answer, Odin did something extraordinary. The massive dog, still wearing the shock collar, positioned himself between Rachel and Mason, his scarred body tense with protective instinct. A low growl rumbled from his chest, directed not at Rachel, but at his handler, the man who was supposed to be his master. "Odin, heel," Mason commanded, but the dog didn't move. "Odin, stand down." Still nothing. The dog's loyalty had shifted completely, recognizing in Rachel something that transcended rank or official position. He knew, on some primal level, who the true alpha was. "Get out," Rachel said. "Leave the dog. He's not going on this mission. You don't have that authority? Then get someone who does. But Odin stays here." Mason left, his face promising retribution, but he left without the dog. As soon as he was gone, Rachel removed the shock collar, revealing angry burns on Odin's neck. The dog pressed against her, his entire body shaking with relief. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered, treating his wounds with gentle efficiency. "I'm so sorry I let this happen." 2 hours later, the deployment began. Rachel watched from the clinic as 11 dogs were loaded into vehicles, their handlers checking weapons and equipment. She'd managed to keep Odin out of it, but the others were going into danger, and every instinct screamed at her to intervene. The storms Major Williams had mentioned were already building on the horizon, dark clouds massing over the mountains like an omen. The weather would turn bad fast, potentially trapping the teams in hostile territory without air support. But the mission was proceeding anyway, driven by intelligence that couldn't wait and commanders who believed in their own invincibility. As the convoy departed, Rachel noticed something that made her decision for her. Rex, just before being loaded into the vehicle, had left something behind, deliberately dropped from his mouth near the clinic entrance. She retrieved it after the convoy was out of sight. It was a piece of fabric, torn from someone's uniform, but not just anyone's. It carried a scent she recognized, had encountered in the intelligence files she wasn't supposed to have accessed. The meeting in the valley wasn't random. Someone had leaked the intelligence, drawn the teams into a trap. And she knew who. Lieutenant Ryan Foster, one of Mason's protégés who'd been asking questions about her background, had been in contact with local insurgent groups. She'd noticed discrepancies in his behavior, small things that wouldn't mean anything individually, but painted a clear picture when assembled. He'd volunteered for guard duty during specific times that coincided with enemy movement patterns. He'd had access to deployment schedules that later proved compromised. And now, he was part of the operation, positioned to guide the teams directly into an ambush. Rachel made her choice. She grabbed her medical bag, but what she packed wasn't standard veterinary equipment. Hidden beneath the false bottom were items from another life: a combat knife, emergency beacon, tactical radio, and something else. Something she'd hoped never to use again. Her old dog tags, the ones that read Lieutenant Commander R. Walker, SEAL Team 6. She changed into dark tactical clothing she'd kept hidden, strapped the knife to her ankle, and slipped out of the clinic. Odin immediately fell into step beside her, moving with the fluid grace of a combat dog despite his injuries. "You don't have to come," she told him, but the dog's response was clear. Where she went, he followed. They requisitioned a vehicle from the motor pool, technically stealing, but she was past caring about regulations. The specialist on duty started to protest until he saw something in her eyes that made him step aside and pretend he hadn't seen anything. The drive to the valley took 2 hours through increasingly bad weather. Rain had started falling, turning the mountain roads into rivers of mud. Twice she had to stop and winch the vehicle out of washouts. Odin sat beside her, alert and focused, occasionally whining when they hit particularly dangerous sections. By the time they reached the overlook above the valley, the storm had become a full-blown tempest. Through the rain and darkness, she could see muzzle flashes below. The mission had gone exactly as wrong as she had feared. The radio in her stolen vehicle crackled with desperate communications. Eagle Base, this is Trident 7. We are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. 12 men down. Repeat, 12 men down. Request immediate extraction. Trident 7, Eagle Base. Weather conditions prevent air support. Can you reach alternate extraction point? Negative. We are pinned down. The dogs are forming a perimeter around the wounded, but we're surrounded. Rachel grabbed the radio. Trident 7, this is Phantom. I'm approximately 800 meters above your position. Mark your location with IR strobes. There was silence on the channel, then confused chatter as people tried to figure out who was transmitting, but someone in the valley had heard that call sign before. Phantom, that's impossible. Phantom's dead. Mark your position, Trident 7. Help is coming. She turned to Odin, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes that had seen too much violence. One more time, boy. Can you do this one more time? The dog's response was to stand and shake himself, ready for action despite his injuries. Together, they descended into the valley, moving through terrain that would have been treacherous in daylight and was near suicidal in the storm. But Rachel knew these paths, had memorized every rock and tree during countless hours of preparation for a moment she'd hoped would never come. The first sign of the ambush was the bodies. 2 seals lay behind a rocky outcropping, their still forms being guarded by Rex and another dog she recognized as Apollo. The dogs had dragged the bodies into cover and were standing watch, refusing to leave despite the firefight raging nearby. Rachel checked for pulses, finding none, but she placed her hand on Rex's head in acknowledgement. Good boy, keep watching them. Moving forward, she found the main group pinned down in a natural depression, taking fire from 3 sides. The 11 remaining dogs had formed a defensive circle around 7 wounded soldiers, their bodies creating a living barrier against incoming fire. Even as bullets cracked overhead, not one dog broke position. Mason was there, bleeding from a shoulder wound, trying to coordinate defense with only 3 functional operators remaining. Connor Mills was unconscious. Blake Harrison was applying pressure to a sucking chest wound on another SEAL. The situation was beyond critical. Thunder! Rachel called out the challenge. Lightning! Mason responded automatically, then his head snapped up as he recognized the voice. Walker? What the hell are you? She slid into the depression, Odin beside her. In the flickering light of muzzle flashes, Mason saw her clearly for the first time. Not the veterinary technician, but the operator she truly was. The way she moved, low and fluid, checking sectors and identifying threats with practiced efficiency. The way she handled the rifle she'd taken from one of the fallen, clearing a jam and returning fire in one smooth motion. Foster's the leak, she said without preamble. He led you into this trap. Foster's dead, Blake gasped between attempts to keep his patient alive. Took the first burst of fire, almost like they knew exactly where he'd be standing. Even traitors could be betrayed, apparently. Rachel processed this information while laying down suppressing fire, her shots finding targets with a precision that made Mason's jaw drop. How many wounded? She asked. 7 critical, 2 walking wounded, 3 functional, including me. The dogs? They won't leave the bodies. We've tried ordering them back, but they're protecting the fallen. Through the rain and gunfire, Rachel could hear it. The rumble of vehicles approaching. Enemy reinforcements. They had minutes, maybe less, before being completely overrun. Eagle Base, this is Phantom, she transmitted. Confirming 12 KIA, 7 critical wounded. Enemy reinforcements approaching from the north. Request danger close fire mission, grid 774295. Unknown station, identify yourself. Who is Phantom? But someone at Eagle Base had been listening, someone who remembered. General Carter's voice cut through the chatter. Phantom, this is Eagle 6 Actual. Confirm your identity. Rachel reached for her dog tags, reading off the serial number that hadn't been spoken in 2 years. There was a pause, then, copy Phantom. Fire mission approved. Danger close authorized. Good to hear your voice. Sir, the dogs won't leave the fallen. I need 5 minutes to get them clear. Phantom, we don't have 5 minutes. Sir, I will not leave them behind. Not again. Another pause. In the background, she could hear urgent discussions, arguments about acceptable losses and mission priorities. But General Carter made the decision that would define his legacy. Roger, Phantom, 5 minutes. Make them count. Rachel turned to the assembled soldiers and dogs. Most were staring at her in shock, processing the revelation that their veterinary technician was something else entirely, but there wasn't time for explanations. Mason, can you move? Yeah, he grunted, his face pale with blood loss but determined. Good. You and Blake get the wounded ready to move. We're going to punch through the eastern line. It's their weakest point. How could you possibly know that? Because I've been studying this valley for 3 years, waiting for someone to be stupid enough to walk into this trap. Now move! She turned to the dogs, and something extraordinary happened. Without commands, without hand signals, all 11 animals oriented toward her. Even the ones who'd never met her before tonight recognized something in her that transcended normal pack dynamics. She was their alpha, their leader, the one they'd been waiting for. Hold the line, she said quietly, and every dog shifted position slightly, tightening their defensive formation. The enemy reinforcements were getting closer. She could hear engines, voices shouting in Pashto, the metallic sound of weapons being readied. They had 2 minutes, maybe 3. Phantom, Ethan Hayes' voice came through her earpiece. He had been monitoring from the base. Satellite shows approximately 40 hostiles approaching your position. 40 against 3 functional operators, 7 wounded, and 11 dogs. The odds were impossible, but Rachel had faced impossible before. Copy. Tell my fire support to be ready on my mark. She looked at Odin, who despite his injuries had positioned himself at the formation's most vulnerable point. The scarred warrior met her gaze with absolute trust. Mason, she called. On my signal, we move. The dogs will clear a path. Walker, who the hell are you really? She pulled off her outer shirt, revealing what the rain and combat had hidden. A tattoo on her left shoulder, the trident of the Navy SEALs intertwined with the designation K9, and a set of coordinates that marked a place in Syria where 11 soldiers had died and 34 had lived because one operator refused to abandon the dogs. I'm Lieutenant Commander Rachel Walker, she said, chambering a round in her rifle. SEAL Team 6, K9 Division. Call sign Phantom, and I've come to bring everyone home. The enemy vehicles crested the ridge, headlights cutting through the rain, 40 fighters against their small group, but Rachel had one advantage they didn't expect. 45 military dogs who would follow her into hell itself. Now, she shouted. What happened next would be remembered in military history as the miracle of Korangal Valley. 11 dogs, responding to a single command from their true alpha, launched themselves at the eastern enemy line with coordinated precision that defied explanation. They moved as one unit, using tactics that hadn't been trained, but seemed to emerge from some deeper instinct. Odin, despite his injuries, led the charge, his scarred body moving with renewed purpose. The enemy fighters, expecting to overwhelm exhausted Americans, instead faced animals that attacked with supernatural coordination. Dogs that should have been operating independently were working in pairs and triads, one distracting while others struck from the flanks. Rex took down a machine gunner, while Zeus and Apollo eliminated a rocket team. Athena, the depressed female who'd shown no spark of life, became a whirlwind of controlled violence, protecting the wounded with savage efficiency. Rachel moved with them, her rifle speaking in controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. She wasn't just fighting, she was conducting, orchestrating a battle symphony where every dog was an instrument playing in perfect harmony. Mason, Blake, and the others could only follow, carrying the wounded while watching in awe as their veterinary technician revealed herself as one of the most lethal operators they'd ever seen. They broke through the eastern line in 90 seconds. The dogs had cleared a path, but the main enemy force was closing fast. Rachel keyed her radio. Eagle 6, Phantom, fire for effect. Danger close. Danger close. Phantom, you're still in the target zone. Fire now. The artillery came screaming in, high explosive rounds that shook the earth and turned the night into day. The enemy vehicles disappeared in balls of fire, their reinforcements scattering or dying as American firepower rained from the sky. But the truly miraculous part was what happened with the dogs. Without any command, all 45 dogs, including the ones who'd appeared from hidden positions around the valley, formed a perfect defensive circle around the American forces and their fallen comrades. As the artillery fell danger close, Mere meters from their position, not one dog broke formation. They stood like living shields, their bodies protecting both the living and the dead. When the barrage ended, the valley was silent except for the rain and the labored breathing of wounded men. The enemy force was gone, eliminated or fled. But the image that would be seared into every witness's memory was those 45 dogs, standing in perfect formation around their humans, refusing to yield even an inch of ground. General Carter's helicopter was the first to arrive as dawn broke through the dissipating storm. He stepped out to find a scene that defied military protocol and explanation. 45 dogs maintaining a defensive perimeter, 7 wounded soldiers receiving treatment, 12 fallen heroes being guarded with a devotion that transcended training, and at the center of it all, a small woman in torn tactical gear, her shoulder tattoo visible to everyone, blood running from multiple wounds she'd ignored to save others. The general approached slowly, his aide and security detail hanging back. He stopped in front of Rachel, who was kneeling beside Odin, treating a gunshot wound the dog had sustained during the fight. "Lieutenant Commander Walker," he said formally. She looked up, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "Sir, I can explain, but General Samuel Carter, 4-star general with 30 years of service, did something that stunned everyone present. He snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. 'No explanation necessary, Phantom. Welcome back from the dead.' One by one, every soldier present followed suit. Mason, despite his wounded shoulder. Blake, tears streaming down his face. Even Connor Mills, who'd regained consciousness in time to witness the revelation, raised his hand in salute. They were saluting not just her rank, which exceeded most of theirs, but what she represented. The warrior who had given up everything to save those others had abandoned. But the most powerful moment came from the dogs. As if responding to some unspoken signal, all 45 animals sat in unison, their eyes fixed on Rachel with absolute devotion. They had found their true leader, the one they had been waiting for, the one who would never leave them behind. "Sir," Rachel said, her voice breaking slightly, "requesting medical evacuation for wounded personnel and proper transport for our fallen. Already en route, full medical team and honor guard." The general paused, studying her. "You know this ends your cover. There will be investigations, questions about why a declared dead SEAL was operating under false identity." "I know, sir." "Was it worth it?" Rachel looked at the dogs, at the wounded soldiers being treated, at the 12 fallen heroes who would return home with honor instead of being left behind. "Every second, sir." The evacuation took 3 hours. Military protocol demanded specific procedures for handling fallen soldiers, and Rachel insisted that each dog that had guarded them be allowed to maintain their vigil until the bodies were properly secured. Rex and Apollo refused to leave the 2 SEALs they had dragged to safety until Rachel personally assured them their duty was complete. Mason approached her as medics treated his shoulder. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "And my life. You owe me nothing. You were doing what you thought was right. I was being an arrogant fool who thought strength meant dominance. These dogs, they followed you because you showed them something I never could. Respect, trust, love. They followed me because I promised never to abandon them. It's the only promise that matters." Connor Mills was loaded onto a stretcher, but he grabbed Rachel's hand as he passed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Blake Harrison, who had managed to save 3 wounded soldiers during the fight, stood awkwardly nearby. Commander, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just remember, every living being deserves respect, even the ones who can't speak for themselves." As the helicopters lifted off, carrying the living and the dead back to Bagram, Rachel sat with Odin's head in her lap. The scarred warrior had finally succumbed to his injuries, requiring immediate surgery but expected to survive. Around them, the 45 dogs maintained their formation, even in the aircraft, their breathing synchronized in that uncanny way that had first revealed their connection to her. Back at Bagram, the story spread like wildfire. The veterinary technician who was actually a SEAL Team 6 operator, the dogs who'd refused to abandon fallen soldiers, the midnight rescue that had saved 7 lives. By noon, reporters were flooding the base's public affairs office with requests for interviews. But Rachel was in a secure debriefing room with General Carter, Admiral Marcus Blackwood from Naval Special Warfare Command, who'd flown in specifically for this meeting, and several officials from intelligence agencies that didn't officially exist. Operation Red Sand, Admiral Blackwood said, spreading classified files across the table. 2 years ago, you were declared KIA after refusing to abandon 45 military working dogs during an ambush in Syria. You held a defensive position for 18 hours, alone except for the dogs, until extraction arrived. 11 soldiers died, but 34 lived because those dogs provided early warning of enemy movements. Yes, sir. After extraction, you disappeared. The official report listed you as killed in action, body unrecoverable. But you were actually placed in witness protection after testifying about command failures that led to the ambush. Failures that certain high-ranking officials wanted buried. That's correct, sir. General Carter leaned forward. But witness protection doesn't explain why you came here, to Bagram, under false identity. Rachel was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. The dogs, sir. These 45 dogs were the same ones from Syria. After I was declared dead, they were redistributed to various units, but I kept track of them. When I learned they'd all been assigned to the same unit here, under Master Sergeant Brooks, and that they were showing signs of severe trauma and abuse, I couldn't stand by. So, you violated witness protection, created a false identity, and infiltrated a military installation to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Yes, sir. Admiral Blackwood exchanged glances with the others. You realize this should result in court-martial, impersonating military personnel, false enlistment, theft of government property, violation of classified protocols. I understand, sir. However, the Admiral continued, your actions last night saved 7 American lives and recovered 12 fallen heroes who would have been left behind. The President himself has been briefed and has expressed his personal gratitude. General Carter pulled out a document. Lieutenant Commander Walker, effective immediately, you are reinstated to active duty. Your death has been officially reversed as an administrative error. You'll return to SEAL Team 6, specifically to head a new program integrating military working dogs into special operations at a level never before attempted. Rachel stared at the document. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Commander. Your country needs you. And apparently, so do 45 dogs who refuse to follow anyone else. She signed the papers, her hand shaking slightly. After 2 years of hiding, of being less than she was officially back. But more importantly, she could now protect the dogs openly, with full authority. There's one more thing, General Carter said. Master Sergeant Brooks has requested to serve under your command. He wants to learn what he calls the right way to train military dogs. Connor Mills and Blake Harrison have made similar requests. They're good men who lost their way, sir. With proper guidance, they could be excellent handlers. Then they're yours, Commander. That evening, Rachel stood in the K-9 facility, but everything had changed. The kennels were open, the dogs free to move and interact. The shock collars and punishment tools had been destroyed. The 45 dogs who'd been through hell and back were finally safe. Mason approached, his arm in a sling but his pride intact. Commander, I've been doing this wrong for 15 years. These dogs, they're not weapons. They're warriors, partners, family. Will you teach me? It's not about teaching, Mason. It's about listening. They'll teach you everything you need to know if you just pay attention. Rex padded over, the Belgian Malinois who had first recognized her. He sat at her feet, tail wagging for the first time in months. One by one, the other dogs joined him, forming their familiar circle around her. But this time, it wasn't defensive. It was celebratory. Ashley Chen appeared in the doorway, smiling. So, Phantom, that's a hell of a call sign. It's just a name. No, it's not. You were a ghost, moving through the system, invisible but always present, protecting those who needed it most. The name fits. Chief Warrant Officer Ethan Hayes joined them, carrying a bottle of whiskey that was definitely against regulations. To fallen heroes, he said, raising the bottle, and to those who refused to leave them behind. They drank in silence, remembering the 12 who hadn't come home alive, but who'd been brought home with honor. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains of Afghanistan, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. It was beautiful and terrible, like everything about war. What happens now? Mason asked. Rachel looked at the 45 dogs, her dogs, who'd followed her through hell and back. Now, We revolutionize military dog training. We show the world that strength comes from trust, not dominance. That loyalty is earned, not commanded. And that no one, human or animal, gets left behind. Her phone rang, a secure line that only a handful of people had access to. She answered, listening to the voice on the other end, her expression growing serious. "Understood, sir. 72 hours. She hung up and turned to the others. "New mission, classified, but I'll need all 45 dogs and a team I can trust." Mason straightened, Connor and Blake flanking him. "We're with you, Commander. You don't even know what the mission is." "Doesn't matter," Blake said. "After what we saw last night, we'd follow you anywhere." Rachel looked at each of them, these men who had started as adversaries and were now offering their loyalty. Then she looked at the dogs, who'd never wavered in their faith despite everything they'd endured. "Ghost Unit," she said quietly. "That's what we'll call ourselves, because we go where others can't, do what others won't, and we never leave anyone behind." Rex barked once, sharp and clear, and the other 44 dogs joined in, their voices rising in a chorus that echoed through the facility. It wasn't the sound of trained military animals, it was the sound of warriors announcing their presence, their unity, their readiness for whatever came next. 3 days later, a transport plane lifted off from Bagram Air Base carrying a unit that didn't officially exist. 45 dogs, 4 humans, and enough classified equipment to start a small war. Their destination was need to know, their mission beyond top secret. But everyone on that plane knew one absolute truth. Wherever they were going, whatever they were facing, they would face it together. As the plane climbed into the night sky, Rachel stood in the cargo hold surrounded by her dogs. Odin, recovered from surgery but still healing, pressed against her leg. Rex maintained watch at the door. Zeus and Apollo had finally lost their anxiety, replaced by focused determination. Athena had rediscovered her spark, her depression lifting like fog in sunlight. "You know," Mason said, joining her, "I spent years trying to break these dogs, to make them into weapons. But you did something I never could. You made them into heroes." "They were always heroes," Rachel corrected. "I just reminded them of it." The plane banked sharply, heading toward a horizon where new threats waited, new challenges that would test the bonds forged in blood and trust. But Phantom and her ghost unit were ready. They'd been through hell together, and they'd emerged not broken, but transformed. In her pocket, Rachel's fingers found the challenge coin Ethan had given her, the one bearing the SEAL Team 6 K9 insignia. But there was a new addition now, 45 small notches carved into the edge, one for each dog that had refused to leave fallen soldiers behind, that had stood against impossible odds because their alpha had asked them to. The transport plane disappeared into the darkness, carrying its precious cargo toward dangers unknown. But somewhere in that cargo hold, 45 tails were wagging because they were with their pack, their family, their leader who would never abandon them. And that was all that mattered. 6 months later, the leaked footage from a helmet camera would surface on international news. It showed 45 dogs moving in perfect synchronization through an urban combat zone, neutralizing threats with precision that defied explanation. At their center, a small woman with a scarred shoulder and eyes that had seen too much, directing them with subtle gestures and quiet words. The operation saved 300 civilians from a terrorist attack that would have been catastrophic. The Pentagon would neither confirm nor deny the existence of Ghost Unit, but in military circles, the legend grew. The woman who came back from the dead, the dogs who wouldn't abandon their fallen, the night when 45 became one and the impossible became reality. And somewhere, in a location that remained classified, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Phantom Walker continued her work, training a new generation of handlers and dogs, teaching them that true strength came not from dominance but from trust, not from fear but from love, and that the greatest warriors were those who understood that every life, human or animal, was worth fighting for. The story ended where it began, with 45 dogs standing guard, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, following the leader they'd waited for, the one who had promised to never leave them behind. And she never did. 2 years had passed since the Korengal Valley incident. Ghost Unit had become a whispered legend in military circles, their operations so classified that even mentioning the name could end careers. Rachel stood in her office at a location that didn't exist on any map, reviewing after-action reports from their latest mission, when her secure phone rang with a tone she hadn't heard in 3 years. The encryption pattern was one she recognized immediately. It belonged to a system that had supposedly been destroyed after Operation Red Sand. Her blood ran cold as she answered. Phantom. The voice on the other end was digitally altered, but something about its cadence felt familiar, triggering memories she'd buried deep. Hello, Rachel. Or should I say, the woman who refused to stay dead. Who is this? Someone who knows the truth about Red Sand. The real truth, not the sanitized version you told the admirals. Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm. Through the window, she could see the 45 dogs in the training yard, suddenly alert, all turning toward her office as if sensing her distress. Red Sand is classified beyond your clearance level, she said carefully. Is it? Then how do I know about the 16th man? The one whose name was scrubbed from every record. The one whose body was never recovered because he never died. The room seemed to spin. Only 3 people had known about the 16th man. Herself, Admiral Blackwood, and someone who was supposed to be dead. Marcus? She breathed, the name barely a whisper. Lieutenant Marcus Stone had been the K-9 unit's intelligence liaison during Operation Red Sand. He'd supposedly died in the initial ambush, his body lost in the chaos, but there had always been inconsistencies in the timeline, questions about how the enemy had known exactly where to hit them. Very good, Phantom. Though I go by a different name now, several, actually. It's amazing what you can become when everyone thinks you're dead. You should know that better than anyone. You were the leak. You set us up. I revealed an opportunity. The Syrians paid well for information, but that wasn't the real prize. Do you know what those dogs really are, Rachel? What Project Cerberus actually created? Rachel's mind raced. Project Cerberus was a black operations program that had allegedly enhanced military working dogs through selective breeding and experimental training protocols. It had been shut down 5 years ago after ethical concerns were raised. The 45 dogs in her unit were supposedly random animals from various breeding programs. They're military working dogs, nothing more. Marcus laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. There's so much more. Haven't you wondered why they synchronize? Why they respond to you with almost telepathic coordination? Why they survived 18 hours of combat that should have killed them all? Through the window, Rachel watched Odin suddenly stand, his scarred head turning toward the mountains as if hearing something beyond human perception. One by one, the other dogs followed suit, all orienting toward the same distant point. What did you do to them? Not me, the program. Genetic modification, neural enhancement, chemically induced pack consciousness. They're not just dogs, Rachel. They're living weapons with capabilities we're only beginning to understand. And you're the only person they've ever fully bonded with. Do you know what that makes you? Their handler. Their trigger. The key to unlocking abilities that could revolutionize warfare, or end it, depending on who controls them. The door to her office burst open. Mason stood there, his face grim. Commander, we've got a problem. Satellite surveillance just picked up unusual movement in Serbia, border region, near the old Soviet research facility. Rachel muted the phone. What kind of movement? Military vehicles, but not Serbian forces. The energy signatures match. Commander, they match our readings from the dogs during synchronized operations. She unmuted the phone. There are others, aren't there? Other enhanced units. 93 confirmed subjects across 7 locations. But yours are special, Rachel. They're the only ones who achieved true pack consciousness. The only ones who survived the full enhancement protocol. And now someone else wants them. Who? Does it matter? Russians, Chinese, private military contractors. Everyone wants what you have, what we created. The transport leaves for Serbia in 72 hours. If you're not there, if your dogs aren't there, the other units will be activated. And unlike yours, they haven't been taught restraint. You're threatening civilian populations? I'm offering a choice. Bring the Ghost unit to Serbia, or watch as 93 enhanced military animals are released in major cities across Europe. They won't be like your dogs, Rachel. They haven't had you to teach them mercy. The line went dead. Rachel stood frozen for a moment, processing the implications. Then she turned to Mason, who had been joined by Connor, Blake, and Ashley Chen. Gather everyone. Full unit briefing in 10 minutes. As they scrambled to comply, Rachel walked to the training yard. The 45 dogs immediately surrounded her, their attention focused with an intensity that now took on new meaning. She knelt beside Rex, looking into his intelligent eyes. You're not what I thought you were, are you, boy? Rex tilted his head, and for a moment, Rachel could swear she saw understanding there that went beyond normal canine intelligence. Zeus approached from her left, Apollo from her right, creating a protective triangle. The other dogs formed concentric circles around them, a defensive formation they had never been taught, but somehow knew. Chief Warrant Officer Ethan Hayes appeared beside her, having arrived for what was supposed to be a routine inspection. "Commander, I've been monitoring unusual communications traffic. Someone's been accessing old Cerberus files, trying to locate research subjects. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than just us." "Ethan, what do you know about Project Cerberus?" He was quiet for a long moment. "More than I should. My brother was one of the researchers. He died trying to shut it down when he realized what they were creating. Said the enhancement protocol didn't just make the dogs smarter or stronger, it gave them something else. A collective consciousness, the ability to process and share information in ways we don't understand. And if someone weaponized that ability, then God help us all." The briefing room was packed. In addition to the core Ghost Unit team, General Carter had arrived with Admiral Blackwood and several officials from agencies Rachel didn't recognize. On the secure video link, the President's National Security Advisor watched with grim attention. Rachel laid out the situation without embellishment: Marcus Stone's survival, the threat to release enhanced animals, the 72-hour deadline. When she finished, the room was silent. "It's a trap," Admiral Blackwood said finally. "Stone wants you and the dogs in Serbia for a reason. This isn't about preventing an attack. It's about acquiring Ghost Unit." "I agree," Rachel said. "But if there really are 93 other enhanced animals, and if they're released without handlers who can control them, the casualties could be in the thousands," General Carter finished. "These aren't normal dogs. Based on what we're learning about Cerberus, they could be unstoppable by conventional means." Ashley Chen pulled up satellite imagery on the main screen. The Serbian facility Stone mentioned, it was a Soviet-era bioweapons research center, officially decommissioned in '92, but intelligence suggests it's been operating under various private military contractors since then. "It's where Cerberus was born," Ethan said quietly. "My brother's final message mentioned coordinates in Serbia, said the original research was based on Soviet experiments from the Cold War. They were trying to create the perfect military animal. And they succeeded," Rachel added, looking at the feed from the training yard where the 45 dogs maintained their defensive formation, even in her absence. "But not in the way they expected." "Commander," the National Security Advisor spoke from the screen, "what are your recommendations?" Rachel stood, her decision made. "We go to Serbia, but not alone, and not unprepared. If Stone has been planning this for 3 years, he's got contingencies we haven't thought of. But he's also made one mistake. He's underestimated the bond between these dogs and their handlers." "You mean you," Blake corrected. "No, I mean all of us. Mason, Connor, Blake, you've all changed how you work with them. They trust you now. That trust might be the only advantage we have." Mason nodded slowly. "The dogs have been different lately, more alert, more coordinated. It's like they're preparing for something." "Maybe they are," Rachel said. "Maybe on some level, they've always known this was coming." General Carter stood. "Ghost Unit is authorized for deployment to Serbia. Full military support will be available, but maintain plausible deniability. Officially, you're not there." As the meeting broke up, Rachel found herself alone with Admiral Blackwood. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something not in the official Cerberus files. The enhancement protocol. It wasn't just for the dogs. The handlers who worked closely with them reportedly began showing unusual abilities: enhanced perception, predictive intuition, the ability to sense threats before they manifested." Rachel thought about all the times she'd known something was wrong before it happened, the way she could feel the dog's emotions as if they were her own. We don't know. The research was destroyed, the scientists are dead or missing. But if it's true, if the enhancement can transfer or be shared between species, then you might be the only person alive who can control what Cerberus created. That night, Rachel stood in the kennels, though kennels was no longer the right word. The dogs lived freely now, choosing their own spaces, forming their own social structures. But tonight, all 45 were gathered around her. "We're going into danger again," she told them, knowing it was foolish to speak to them like they could understand, but unable to stop herself. "This time might be different. This time, We might not all come back. Odin approached, his scarred face pressing against her hand. Then he did something extraordinary. He walked to a storage locker and pawed at it until Rachel opened it. Inside was gear she didn't recognize. Specialized harnesses with electronic components, devices that looked like they were designed to enhance or monitor the dog's abilities. Where did this come from? But even as she asked, she knew. The dogs had been preparing, somehow acquiring or directing the acquisition of equipment they'd need. The collective consciousness Ethan had mentioned wasn't just theory, it was real, and it was evolving. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A single photo, Marcus Stone, very much alive, standing in front of the Serbian facility. But it was what was beside him that made Rachel's blood run cold. 3 dogs, similar to hers, but wrong somehow. Their eyes were flat, emotionless, their postures aggressive in a way that suggested programming rather than training. The message below read, "They're magnificent, aren't they? But they lack what yours have. They lack you. 71 hours remaining." Rex growled low in his throat, and Rachel realized all 45 dogs were looking at the phone, somehow seeing or sensing the image. Their reaction was unanimous. Hackles raised, teeth bared, a collective response to a threat they recognized as existential. "Mason!" she called, and he came running. "Accelerate our timeline. We leave in 12 hours. "Commander, what about preparation?" "The dogs are already prepared. They have been for longer than we realized." She showed him the equipment Odin had revealed. "They've been planning this themselves." Mason stared at the gear, then at the dogs, his worldview shifting visibly. "They're not just enhanced, are they? They're evolving. Into what, I don't know, but whatever's waiting in Serbia, whatever Marcus has become, whatever he's planning, the dogs know more than they're showing us. We're not leading them into this mission. They're leading us." As if in confirmation, all 45 dogs moved to the door, sitting in perfect formation, ready to deploy. Their breathing had synchronized again, but this time Rachel could feel it, her own breathing matching theirs without conscious thought. The enhancement protocol hadn't just changed the dogs. It had created something new, a fusion of human and animal consciousness that defied scientific understanding. And now, that creation was going to war against its own dark mirror. "Commander," Ashley called from the doorway, her face pale. "We just intercepted communications from Serbia. It's not just Marcus. There's an entire organization, buyers from 12 countries arriving for some kind of demonstration. They're calling it the Cerberus auction. They're going to sell the enhanced animals. Not just sell them, mass produce them. Marcus claims he's reverse engineered the enhancement protocol. He can create as many as buyers want." Rachel looked at her 45 dogs, understanding finally dawning. They weren't just going to Serbia to stop a threat. They were going to prevent the weaponization of an entire species, to stop humanity from crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "Then we stop him," she said simply. "All of him. The operation, the research, the knowledge itself if necessary." "That's a suicide mission," Connor said quietly. "Maybe, but some things are worth dying to prevent." Odin barked once, sharp and clear, and the others joined in. Not the chaotic barking of dogs, but something else, a war cry, a promise, a warning to enemies they could somehow sense across continents. Rachel checked her weapon and looked at her team, the humans who had learned to see animals as partners, not tools, and the dogs who'd transcended their species to become something unprecedented. Ghost Unit moves in 12 hours. Destination, Serbia. Mission, prevent the end of the world as we know it. As she spoke, she noticed something that should have been impossible. In the reflection of the window, she could see not 45 dogs and 5 humans, but something else. A single entity, multi-bodied but unified in purpose. The enhancement protocol's true achievement wasn't creating super soldiers. It was creating the first trans-species consciousness, a collective that could think and act as one while maintaining individual identity. And Marcus Stone had no idea what he'd awakened. The story of Rachel Phantom Walker and her 45 dogs teaches us that true strength doesn't come from dominance or control, but from mutual respect and unconditional loyalty. In military culture, where hierarchy and command often overshadow compassion, Rachel's approach revolutionized not just dog training, but our understanding of leadership itself. The most profound lesson lies in recognizing that those we dismiss as lesser often possess capabilities we cannot imagine. Rachel was dismissed as just a veterinary technician. The dogs were seen as mere tools, yet together they achieved what elite forces couldn't. This reminds us that every individual, regardless of rank or species, has inherent worth and untapped potential, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. The dog's refusal to abandon their fallen comrades, even when ordered by a 4-star general, demonstrates that loyalty transcends programming or training. It emerges from genuine bonds forged through trust and respect. Rachel didn't train these dogs to be loyal. She earned their loyalty by promising never to abandon them and keeping that promise even at great personal cost. Perhaps most importantly, this story challenges us to question systems that prioritize efficiency over empathy, results over relationships. Mason's transformation from a handler who saw dogs as weapons to one who recognized them as partners illustrates that it's never too late to change our perspective and grow. In our own lives, whether in military service, corporate environments, or personal relationships, the message remains clear. Those who lead with compassion and courage, who refuse to leave anyone behind, inspire a loyalty that cannot be commanded, only earned.